Hey, everybody, I'm so excited. I'm here with a gang of very professional, bright, brilliant millennials who are going to have a discussion with me about Don't Drop the Mic. And it should be interesting. It should be provocative. If you haven't picked up a copy of the book, you should join the conversation, get a copy of the book. Let me hear from you. Let me know what you think about moving into positions of influence and affluence and managing that and seeing yourself in roles that you saw others in previously. But we are in the midst of a transition, the changing of a guard, the building of new ideas, the starting of companies, the starting of ministries. And we're going to talk about preaching because all of us are preachers. So we're going to talk about preaching too. And we're going to have a great time doing it. So listen in. Welcome your comments. I'd love to hear from you. Don't drop the mic. And I have Dr. Antipas Harris, who is joining us, and he is the dean of Jake's Divinity School. He has years and years of expertise in ministry. I met him. He was teaching homiletics at Regent University, and now he is with Jake's Divinity School, and we're proud to have him to be a part. Peter Lewis is here, who is the founder of Braveheart Ministries, has years of pastoral experience, has traveled around the world, literally around the globe at his young age, ministering and preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, has been involved in corporate America, is an entrepreneur, has a lot of expertise, and we're welcoming Peter to join us. My daughter, Sarah Jakes Roberts, is joining us as well. Many of you know her and have experienced her ministry, and that has certainly preceded her years, her influence and impact. She's a world-renowned speaker and a best-selling author in her own right. She's got a brand new book coming out. She's going to tell you more about that, I'm sure. And we're just going to have a conversation and see where it goes. So welcome, everybody. How's it going?
Glad to be here.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's good to have you. Peter, I wrote Don't Drop the Mic, and before we got online, you said it was like being in your grandmother's kitchen, which is a metaphor that I used in the book, talking about how difficult it was for me to try to put into a formal format, what is for me a spiritual experience, and having the vocabulary to articulate in a way that outsiders would understand what's happening on the inside between me and the text was a bit intimidating, but I jumped on it and I hopefully did it. What did you think?
Oh, I just told you before we hopped on how grateful I am. When we met a few years ago and we, talked about the possibility of me learning from one of the greatest, in my opinion, preachers of our day, I was thrilled. And so we had talked about what would that, my mind, what would that look like? And really, I want to commend you and honor you. And Dr. Frank Thomas obviously played a role of that. You mentioned him. You guys did it. I'm with this book alone, and I feel like I'm in your mind and in your heart. And that proverb or the Psalm that I think about, it says, God showed Moses his ways, but Israel his acts. And you didn't just give us what you do, but how you do it. And I don't know, I'm just as a young preacher, kind of learning my way. I am beyond grateful for this. It's an invaluable resource for guys like me. So thank you.
Wow. I'm glad to hear that from you. I appreciate that you're very generous in your remarks. And I appreciate it. Dr. Antipas, what did you think?
I was blown away. I mean, I've read a ton of books on homiletics. This by far is as intellectual and practical as any I've ever read. And that's just the truth. A lot of the things that you say here help me understand how you think. I think that's what Peter was getting at, what you think, but also how you think about the preaching moment. And I think that not only how to do it, but how to approach it. It's just everything is here. And then the metaphor you use about cooking, I actually haven't read a homiletics book that uses cooking as a metaphor. I've read one on jazz, but this one on this is a brilliant book.
Well, I was true to form. Even now I'm preparing to do a message, and I gather all of my ingredients, all of my thoughts are in my phone, and I jot down little things and I add everything, much like you get all your ingredients together when you're getting ready to cook, sir, and you know what you're going to cook, and you have all the ingredients together. And then comes the difficult part of figuring out how to lay out the story succinctly in a way that it communicates and transmits well to other people. How much of an impact do you think growing up? I mean, I am your book, and growing up with hearing my preaching and me being your only pastor all of your life, how much has that impacted the way you approach a text?
It's everything. It is how I gauge whether or not a sermon has been put together well. But I will say that having experienced your preaching, and I think preaching is just a portion of what I've experienced, to see you in business meetings, to see you advocating for the brand, advocating for the nonprofit in different sectors, and seeing you speak in different circles and arenas over time has been invaluable for me as your daughter. I love the cooking analogy because I've also experienced your cooking most of my life as well. But I will say that even for me, most of my life, I've just spent time experiencing the finished product. Like many people who are probably watching, I've experienced the finished product. So I think even for me, to have this opportunity where I get to see behind the veil, to see what's happening in your mind that creates that finished product is so incredible, so impactful. And I have to tell you, I think even for this generation, the idea of how, this is such a how-to generation. That's why YouTube is so popular. And for you to give us the how-to that we can immediately translate, not just if we're in ministry, but if we're having presentations, if we're building those social media platforms, to have that how that will allow us to attract the people who are connected to our voice, I think is going to be instrumental, not just once the book drops, but I think this is going to be one of those generational books that we continue to pass down to people as they enter into different spaces and circles.
It's funny when you start talking about the how to. Doing this particular book more than any other book I have ever done, it was so personal for me to let people into my head and and what's going on in my head, not only while I'm preparing, but even while I'm speaking, and the relationship that goes on between me and the text. And the reason that I did it, Dr. Thomas wrestled me down to the floor, Frank Thomas, to get me to that I had an obligation to leave in print what I did. And he teaches preaching, Black preaching in particular, and approached it from an ancestral perspective that was very, very fascinating. That's not to say that everybody couldn't use it, but it tends to be a tradition that was formulated out of communicating your stories around the fire in Africa, just telling stories without pencil, without paper, just communicating. And then the way in which certain minds learn to have visuals that you translate into audibles is a part of it. And for me, when I read the scriptures, I see a movie, and that might be why I'm in film. I see a movie, when I read a certain man had two sons, and the younger of them said to the father, give me the portion of goods that falleth unto me, and he divided unto them his living. I'm seeing the discussion. I'm feeling the feelings. I'm feeling the tension. I'm feeling the audacity of the young man to ask the old man for what he would rightfully get after he died. Like, I can't wait on you to die. Go ahead and give it to me now. And I think that is indicative of a generation of people, some in my generation, some in the younger generation, who want everything now, They want it fast, they want it quick, and they want it easy. When in fact, I come from an era that everything was done slow. We didn't have quick grits. We didn't have Jiffy cornbread. We didn't have Siri. We didn't have GPS systems. Everything was done slow. And while I don't even myself have time to do everything slow now, there is a distinct difference between food that is slow cooked and food that is quick cooked. And so it is with preaching. The more it marinates inside of you, the more it ferments and develops. It gets a depth and a quality. There's a reason that people have bottles of wine that are 500 years old. You know, what else would you keep 500 years? But wine has an ability to refine, and the flavor becomes richer with time. And so it is with preaching. It can't be where you only grab the Bible when you have to preach. It has to be a relationship that you have with the Word of God on an ongoing basis, where you fall more in love with the Word than you are with the crowd. Because when you love the Word more than you love the crowd, irrespective of the size of the crowd or the kind of the crowd, you articulate with a deeper level of passion because of the beauty of the continuity of the text itself and what it brings to life. Dr. A, when you taught homiletics, when you read the book, how different is it from what you would get in school?
Well, a couple of things. One is that I'm amazed that you were able to get into your own head and tell us how you did this. That in itself is genius. My brother has a master's degree in improvisation from New England Conservatory, and he studied from a scholar who studied Mahalia Jackson.
Mhm.
And now Mahalia Jackson couldn't teach Mahalia Jackson. And
Mhm.
at Berklee College of Music, they have a degree in James Brown. James Brown probably couldn't teach James Brown. Usually other people study and figure it out. But the fact that you can actually tell us, and while reading this, we have all these aha moments. I call this practice that is theory laden, right? You have embedded in this book so many nuggets of theory, because my philosophy is that theory must come from practice and it shouldn't come from the other way around. So when you talk about, say, for instance, my sermons must have spiritual relevance, inspirational encouragement, and action-worthy application. That's theory right out of your practice. And I'm thinking, wow, because I'm one who loves history, and I'll get lost in history, and sometimes I'm preaching, I'm telling all this history, and then there's the so what question. And you have a chapter in here where you said the best sermon you never preached, where you
Right.
put all the information together, and then you had the so what. The fact that you can share with us the questions that you ask your own sermon
Mhm.
itself is instructive for us when we're preaching. So I think that throughout the book, and there are tons and tons and tons of places where you do that, where I think that from a homiletics perspective, you talk about how preaching is an art and we're losing the art of communication. And the way that you're constructing communication or preaching as an art and not a science, I think is crucial. A couple other places that I mentioned, you talked about finding the joint, for example. How do you connect with your audience, where you've been and where they are, and then take them on a journey? Another thing you talk about is how one must connect with the audience in order to take them on the journey from the standpoint of, are we talking down to people, as you say, preaching to people,
Mhm.
or are we preaching with people?
Mhm.
Those little nuances are genius in my perspective, because it helps us in acting, we call it to break the fourth wall. How do you break the fourth wall? All of that is embedded in here. So I'll go on and on and on, but I'll
No,
stop.
that's great. That's great. I love it. It was very intimidating. I cannot tell you how uncomfortable it was for me to examine my own head and then let people into my head
Yeah.
to show. And I think one of the things that when you start talking about asking, a lot of people are intimidated to speak because they feel like they don't know enough. But it isn't what you know about the text that makes you a great preacher. It's what you ask of the text. It's what you ask when you read, when you hear it, that causes you to be better at what you do. And I think every great teacher is a great teacher because they're a great student. And every great student becomes a great student when he studies as if he were going to teach. So there's a role reversal in that whole process. If you study like you're trying to pass a test, that's one thing. But if you're studying like you're going to have to teach this, there's a greater impact in the way you approach it. And if the teacher comes to the class or the preacher comes to the text full of what he already knows, there is no room to gain anything else. And after 43 years of preaching, most texts I have preached over and over again, and it's so easy to come to the text full of what I have preached before. But I generally come to the text pretty much as a fool and empty and curious. And that curiosity is the catalyst that translates into revelation and information and inspiration that you could not get if you were already full. You have to come to the text empty and searching and longing to get more out of the text. And then even when I hear other people, I listen for what they saw that I missed. And I love that they see things that I missed. But then I also hate that they see things that I miss. And I think, why did I see that? I wanted to see that first. And I find myself in that kind of situation. I think, Sarah, you touched on something that I think that is unexpected in the book, because people would expect me to talk about preaching, but also talk about interviews. I've been interviewed by Larry King. I've been interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. I've been interviewed by Dr. Phil. I've been interviewed by some of the best people in the business. NBC, ABC, CBS, been on all of the networks, TVN, Daystar, just across the board, CBN multiple times, Canada, in the UK, ministering, doing business interviews. I've done leadership development for banks and companies and just so many different settings that I call it bilingual. But and I'm not really changing languages. It's still English, but there's a different way that you communicate in the pulpit from how you communicate in an interview, from how you communicate at a press conference, from how you communicate in a boardroom, those different languages. And some people are not versatile enough. You get a preacher in an interview on Fox News and they sound like a preacher. Bless God, I'm just so happy to be here today. Thank you for having me. I think it's a real privilege to share with my brothers and sisters today. And hello, you're on Fox News. That's church language. Being able to differentiate one from another, and you're starting to do that now. You're finding yourself in all of these different situations. What is that like for you, Sarah, to go in and out of all of those settings and changing the terminologies, the vernacular? You still are who you are. There's an authenticity there, but you also have to be respectful that your audience is different.
I'm so thankful that I've had you to exemplify that for me throughout my life. You talk about coming to the text empty. Having been raised on your preaching, that is nearly impossible for me to do, because you've had some epic sermons where it's like, there are just some parts of the Bible I will not touch at all, because it is just marked for this moment in time in history in which you married it so beautifully to a topic or sermon. But as it relates to versatility, like I said, I feel like you've demonstrated that for me. And the subject of this book, I think, speaks to this idea of being so versatile that you don't miss out on your message, even if the method or the room changes. So don't drop the mic. That's what's in my mind when I'm going into these interviews, whether it's something like CNN or Fox News or speaking at a church. What's in my mind is don't drop the mic. I want to make sure that the message, the mandate, the mission of my life shows up no matter where I am. And so it does take a lot of thinking about the audience, thinking about the culture of the environment that I'm stepping into, and not so that I can make myself fit into the culture, culture, but so that I can be sensitive enough to the culture that I'm able to lead them to whatever the subject matter is. And so, because I think a lot of times when people hear this, sometimes they think to themselves, well, that means I have to fit into whatever is happening in the room. You don't have to change who you are to fit into the room, but if you want the room to come with you, then you cannot drop the mic in this moment. You're going to have to figure out what moves this room, what's important to this room. When I spoke for a corporation for the first time, I knew that there wasn't going to be an altar call at the end. They care about their bottom line, and yet they've invited me here to inspire their employees. And so the bottom line in that moment is making sure that they are inspired. And so I have to translate who I am and what I carry for this space that I am invited in, but it is not at all diluting it. It's making it more powerful. I think Paul said, to the Jew, I became a Jew, and making sure that we're able to make sure that we're nimble enough to do that.
That's very, very, very good. Peter, what was one of your great takeaways? If you're like me, I'm always trying to be a better preacher than I was before I read the book or heard the person. What was one of the great takeaways that you've gotten out of the book so far?
I'll tell you, for me, I wrote it down last night, page 141, this line right here. And I think as a young preacher, this is something that I have really struggled to hone in on, to master, to focus on. You said the power of the answer is the result of the complexity of the problem. And for me, and I'll just be transparent, really developing that problem and having the patience. I am so eager, Bishop. I'm the eager beaver. Like, let me just run to the glorious truth. Let me give you the answer, right? I think even as guys, we just want to fix it. We see the pain, we see the problem, let's fix it. And I would say my biggest shortcoming as a preacher is that I just jump to the answer. I jump to that revelation, that truth. And so my biggest takeaway, and I've seen you do this, I mean, it's awesome. It is like the suspense of the hook of a movie, right? You get that first opening scene and you're like, now I'm hooked. You know, there's no scrum, stop scrolling. I got to see what the point is, you know? And so for me, I think it's a matter of having the patience, and it's not just the patience, it's I think something I've seen you do, and that you mentioned in this book with the problem, is you marinate in the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You actually get comfortable being uncomfortable with pain.
Mm-hmm.
And you immerse yourself in that experience of whatever the pain is, whatever the problem is, whatever that genuine point of anxiety. You get really good at describing it, articulating it in such a way that makes us A, relate, but B, it makes us uncomfortable, and it brings us to a place of, we want to know, what is God's answer? What is the truth for this? And so for me, I think a big takeaway is being comfortable, being uncomfortable with the problem, and really sitting in that problem and understanding the problem that the answer is trying to solve. And so I don't know if you want to speak to that, but that's something that, man, I wish I could have a crash course in that.
Well, for example, when you look at Jeremiah 18, and the Bible says the vessel that he made of clay was marred in the hand of the potter. My mind says, I thought if I made it to the hand of the potter, I would be safe. How could it be possible that the potter who selected me and shaped me and formed me and is now holding me in his hand, that while I am in his hand, the vessel that he made of clay is marred in the hand of the potter? It does not say that the potter made a mistake. Neither does it say that the clay was defective. It just describes to me that it is possible to be in the potter's hand and still be marred. And so as we stand here in this theological conundrum of trying to honor the hand of the potter, and yet admit that there are instances that you can be in his hand and still be marred, the dilemma becomes, Does that now discredit me from service? Is he going to throw me away? Is he going to start over again with better clay? So when the text says so, and that so describes the tension of the decision that he makes as he grapples with what to do with this calamity that has occurred in the process of becoming. He made it again another. And when I look at that, he made it again another. How can it be it and another? And so creating these theological tensions adds to the complexity, the power of the text. Is not always in the solution. It's really in the dilemma. Because the answer is only brilliant when the question is clearly defined. So when I write in my book about that, many times, as Peter said, we rush past the question to get to the answer. He'll make it all right. Well, if you do that, sermon's over. How does he take it and make it another? How does he take Abram and make him Abraham? How does he take Sarai and make her Sarah? How does he take Jacob and make him Israel? The Bible is full of instances where marred vessels were made again another, and it was me, but it's not me. And I am the same, but I'm not the same. And all of that tension is, to me, hidden in the fibers of the text if we slow down and think about it. That's an example of it.
It's a great example, and I think you just illustrated another point that you made that I took away as a great highlight again for young preachers. This is something that leapt off at me. You mentioned the relatives of the text, and you do that. I mean, your history in the Word and your love of the Word, I think, gives you the colors and the sounds and the ingredients to preach with, to paint with, to continue the analogy. Your broad understanding of the context. I remember you preaching Wade in the Water. And you went from water, from the beginning of the Bible to the end, to the rivers of Revelation, to the beginning 4 rivers of Genesis. And I thought, this man has the context and the relatives of those texts. I think that cannot be overstated. Is really, whether you preach all those things at once, you have them in your pocket, you have them in your heart, that you can pull on them and draw from them in the appropriate time. And you just illustrated that. I think that's such a wonderful takeaway for me, and for any young preacher, is just really getting a handle on those relatives of the text.
When you said that, I thought to myself, David killed Goliath, or knocked him down with 1 rock, but he had 5. To be over prepared and to have options so that instantaneously on your feet, you can pick the best rock for the job, means that you don't come at a giant with 1 rock. You've got to have your quiver full of arrows. You've got to have your bag full of rocks. You've got to have the ability to pivot in the moment, because you're actually, in our tradition of preaching, it is not a monologue, it's a dialogue. And you're building it with the congregation, and the congregation, much like the patient tells the physician where the point of pain is, the congregation tells you where to press. And so you got to have more than one technique, because certain things you don't know till you're up on stage applying the text, whether this is an area to apply more pressure or not. And it is very much a dialogue between you and the congregation, and the ultimate experience is a relationship. But it starts with a relationship with the Word and the depth of the Word. Let me ask you this. Is it a lot of pressure coming of full age at this time, in a pandemic, in a global crisis, in racial tension, in political tension, in civil discourse, to come of age and have the driver's seat at this time and at your age. Because one of the things that I'm also trying to say to the next generation is you're up. this is you, you know. The great leaders of the civil rights movement, the great leaders of our country, the great pulpiteers down through the ages are all aged and passing away. And the mantle is clearly in your hand, not as a youth speaker, not as an oddity, not as an assistant. You're like on the main stage. Is there a lot of pressure for you as a young person to say, give me 10 more years? or do you feel ready to take the mic and not drop it? Anybody? Just
I'll say yes. Yes, there's pressure, and we don't feel ready. I don't feel ready. The challenges we're facing, they feel overwhelming. And, you know, at oftentimes I've shared with you, I don't know what to say. What do I say here in this time? There are no words for what's happening. And that's really the last 2 years. That's been I found myself just, you know, at a loss for words, and that's painful, and that's hard. I will say this, and I don't, you know, I say this genuinely, authentically. The belief of the fathers in us, in our generation, taking time to pour into us, to give us resources, to say, I believe in you. We're giving you the mic. There's a sense of, okay, I think we can do this. I think we are supposed to come of age, and to be willing to not drop the mic and to stay in the game and to keep speaking, even when we screw up, even when we make mistakes and say things we shouldn't say, or don't say anything when we should have spoken up. Those are the things, I think, the faith of your generation of saying, hey, this is your time. It gives me comfort, gives me strength. And I'm seeing that happen. And there's some amazing voices and hearts emerging in this hour, I think, speaking very clearly and helping lead the narrative in this hour. So that's what I would say.
Absolutely. What, anybody else want to jump on that?
Yeah, I agree with you, Peter, to hear that, you know, generation that is ahead of us telling us that you're ready for this is comforting, because I don't always feel ready. But I just draw back to that marinating in the problem from the book and really understanding what the question is before we provide the solution. And we have so many questions, this generation, so many questions that people are trying to answer. And I do believe the solution is in the word. And so I am convinced to take it one question at a time and to marinate fully in that question so that I can understand as I'm preaching and teaching how the solution applies to now. I think that, Dad, that's what's made you so relevant over time, is that you weren't afraid to face whatever question society was facing. Are we safe? Are we going to be okay? Can we recover from this? I mean, seeing you stand up to the pandemic, I mean, who didn't have questions? As leaders, as citizens, there were so many questions, and yet you turn right to that question and you started providing us with answers, solutions, reminders of what was already down in some of us, but maybe new to others. But ultimately, that faith is what I believe brought us through. And so I watch you, not just as my father, but as this general superhero, Superman, Batman of the faith. And you show me how to fly. You show me how to turn on my cape and put on my cape and to soar. So it is nerve wracking, but it's also very encouraging to know that you've gone ahead of us.
Wow. What do you think, Antipas?
I think it is a lot of pressure, but it's also inspiring in many ways, challenging in many ways. I think in the book, you really give us, you connect with this generation when you say confront your own fears.
Mhm.
And because you let us know that even a person who has a platform as big as yours has had to face fears and overcome them in the moment. So you've had big moments that you've had to stand up to. So that's why I say it's inspiring and challenging and all of that. But also you say that we shouldn't seek to imitate, but to implement. I like that.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
said because you can glean from previous generations and people that we admire. At the same time, you talk about controlling the moment and not letting the moment control you. So that's challenging for us. I think, how do we take challenging time, unprecedented times, and create a platform? And in one way, I understand don't drop the mic is seize the moment. Don't lose grip of the moment. You talk about that, how you cannot be prepared and you show up for a lecture or a presentation and you're bedazzled and you're not quite ready, and you give off this sense of not being ready. So in many ways, I think what we face is a sobering moment where we have to focus on the issues and remember, from the words of your book, that this is an opportunity for us to enter into a new phase of communication, technology, platform, and virtual space. That if we thought we were going to be preparing for the big stage that you create, maybe we're preparing for a new type of stage. Just like when I went to university, I thought I was going to be a college professor at a traditional classroom, go to the classroom every day, and I love to give lectures. And then suddenly there was online education where you didn't go to the classroom. So I had
Right,
to really prepare for that. But I
right.
had to pivot, as you said, pivot. So this creativity of pivoting, and this, I said this last point, you talk about, and also Frank Thomas picks up on it in the end of the book, where he talks about the artistry of preaching is to paint the picture. This notion of preaching being artistry suggests that there has to be a nimbleness, a dexterity of ability to move beyond an impasse, or to take what we thought would be that and create something new. So this idea that you can take from here and there and create something new is amazing to me. And you pick up on that in the book when you talk about grandma. You said no recipe is really just sort of pulled out of thin air, but
Mhm.
they are passed down from grandma. And then once you get it from grandma, you put your little bit in it too, and you change it up just a little bit, depending on how you feel or what
Mhm.
resources are available to you, what tools are available to
Right,
you. And therefore you're cooking within a tradition. So it's
right,
not all of your own, but it's kind of your own because you made it your own. So I
right.
think that this is an opportunity for us now to draw upon all of these resources and create opportunity that is our own.
Blind Bartimaeus sat by the highway side begging. Let's blank out the page and go with the words alone. Blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the highway side begging. Was the highway asphalt? Not likely. Were there cars going by? Not likely. Uh, the words are not enough to deliver the message if you don't fill in the blanks. So if you see the highway side as more of a dirt road, and you understand the Palestinian heat and the dust storms, and you see him over there amongst tumbleweed with his coat and his cup, and all of a sudden the Bible mentions the coat, not the cup, but it mentions him begging, and you preach the coat and the cup, and to be able to color in the dust and the debris, and to notice that he is called blind Bartimaeus. His problem precedes his name. He's been blind so long that his problem has become a part of his name. And there he sits, as he probably sat every day, on the side of the road, begging, having picked out a preferred spot. And he heard that Jesus was passing by. Wow. Then he cannot see, but he can hear. Wow. Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. 2, God never takes everything at the same time. He always leaves you something. 3, he doesn't need anything that you lost to heal to you. That he can take what you got left and use it as a catalyst to begin the healing process. He cried out, oh, he can speak. So he's got at least 2 senses and 1 gone. And with those 2 senses, it becomes a catalyst so strong that he arrested the movement of Jesus and his disciples on their way to Calvary. They tried to shut him up. He would not be silenced. So even though he is blind, he is strong and determined. And he is yelling in the direction of sound because he cannot see where Jesus is. And he doesn't even know for a moment that Jesus stopped. What do we have to do to stop Jesus from passing by? And to begin to grapple with, he called me, and now I have to go in the direction of what I heard, but I can't see. And I have to walk by faith and not by sight. And I have to be willing to stumble in front of people who scoffed at me. And I have to be able to find my way to Jesus just to tell him that I'm blind and I cannot see. Having found him and come close to Jesus, I thought surely he would heal me, but he doesn't heal him instantly. He has to be willing to make his first steps in the dark. And then to go back as you tell that story and the intimidation of moving to obey Jesus without having gotten what you really wanted from him, and to be willing to stumble in the dark toward an answer, epitomizes the walk of faith and the humiliation of having to do it in front of people who told you to shut up. What does that feel like emotionally? To face uncertain steps around uncertain people at an uncertain time with a desperation that says, if I miss this moment, he may never pass this way again. He is passing by, not coming to. Jesus wasn't even looking at him. Have you ever felt overlooked? And picking out of the text those things that are expressed but also implied, and then relating it to a congregation who is neither blind nor Palestinian, not an Israeli, not born 2,000 years ago. The book becomes antiquated if the preacher cannot deliver the truth of the text and contemporize it in such a way that it becomes relevant to the hearer. And I do that, and I attempt to do that, but then to explain how to do that was kind of scary. Peter, you're shaking your head.
That's slow cooking right there. And I think that's the slow cooking you're talking about. You know, even Proverbs says the lazy man doesn't roast his game. And you only talk that way and preach that way because I think there's something about roasting that game, about sitting in that text long enough, not just to get a fancy point, but to get what the Spirit's illuminating between the lines. And I think that's something for our generation, Bishop. And I don't know if you want to speak to this, but we get distracted. We want things fast. We think we're engaging with something if we like it and comment it and share it. Well, but to engage with the text is to take time and to put aside distractions and allow the Spirit of God to illuminate these nuances that you can't get just by swiping. And
Right.
so what part of our culture, what can we learn? Because this is in our culture, right? We now have a culture that's Uber Eats, and we want it fast and we want it now. But when it comes to the Word of God, you can't get what you're talking about and unpack the same results without that patience and without that time.
I think it starts this way. And I'm all for tweeting and what have you. That's great. But the Gettysburg Address would have never been written in a tweet. The slow cooking of thought and the marinating of ideas results in a document that outlives you and outlasts you. And I think that's a very important thing to do. A prime example of it is this. When we're sitting in a meeting and we hear a great word, we tweet it. When I came up, we wrote it down. The difference is you're so busy giving it away, you never really took it in. So you throw a statement out there and everybody runs with it and they retweet it, they retweet it, they retweet it, but you didn't keep it for you. I'm all for tweeting it after I wrote it down because I want to keep it. It is not about impressing your followers. It is about ingesting the Word of God. The Bible says the engrafted Word of God is able to save your soul. So only the word that sticks to you is the word that you can use. So I'm still preaching things today that I learned when I was 19. And I was teaching the tabernacle at 22 years old with an overhead projector that I don't think they even make them anymore, and slides. And I was teaching my heart out at 22 years old to 7 people in a Wednesday night Bible class. I wasn't crowd driven or follower driven. It's being word driven. And yes, I tweet and I do Instagram, I do Facebook, and I do everything. I haven't quite got to TikTok yet, but I'm trying to keep up. I'm trying to keep up. I think a serious student who reads Don't Drop the Mic may change their methodology and not be so focused on showing people what you were exposed to, but allowing what you are exposed to become engrafted and to become a part of your repertoire, and to change your thinking, not your saying. Your thinking, not your saying. Because if you read the book carefully, it is as much about listening as it is about talking. It is how you listen at the text. It is how you listen at the crowd. I start listening at the crowd when I get an invitation, a letter in the mail. I listen at the letter. The letter tells me a lot. When I get off the plane, the person that picks me up, that tells me a lot. What they say, how they're dressed, what they talk about. When I walk in the building, I never like to sit in the green room. The worship songs tell me a lot. The atmosphere tells me a lot. They're preheating the oven that I have to bake in. So I want to be there to see what temperature I have to work with. So I compare it a lot to food. You don't just mix up a cake and throw it in a cold oven. I want to make sure that the oven is warm enough. And if it's not, what do I need to do to get it to the temperature level that I need to drop the level of the word that I have into a place where it won't fall? So those kinds of things. If you don't cook, you probably lost the whole point. But if you cook, you understand what I'm talking about. I also talk about not too terribly long ago, Sarah, you were preaching in Australia. You've done meetings in America. You've done meetings in old-fashioned Pentecostal churches. You've done meetings in churches where everybody had on skinny jeans and I don't know what they call them when they roll up the jeans and your ankles are out. You've been in all of those different settings without losing yourself. Talk about the adjustment of being in a room where all the criteria is different, because I know you're experiencing that. And what was applauded in this room is castigated in this room, from dress to tone to image. If you're going to be versatile enough to walk into every room, how much thought goes into this is a different kind of room for you?
Oh goodness. It's it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference the rooms that I am in and how I want to introduce myself in that room. You know, it's the difference between hey girl to like I'm so honored and privileged to be in this environment today. And yet, my goal, though, is to make sure that all of who I am shows up. And the beautiful part of that is that it is not foreign for me to be either, hey, girl, or I'm privileged to be in this space. And so I think giving myself room to tap into which version of myself I need to be in order to show up is really important. But I have to make sure that I am not so committed to being authentic that I cross the line of offensive. And so there is a way that you can stretch people to embrace a new way of speaking. My husband and I, we spoke in the UK, and they told us, well, we don't talk back, and we don't do a lot of shouting, and so they're just going to sit there and listen. And we're like, okay, we can handle that. Now, by the time we got finished, they were standing up ready to throw their shoes at us, but so we were able to bring them to this new space of reaction. But I think at the end of the day, we were so committed to the mission that we weren't going to allow our authenticity to become offensive to the space that we're in. And that's why studying those rooms and studying those spaces is really important, because a lot of times I think in our generation, we can say, well, this is just who I am and you have to accept it. But you do that at the expense of them missing a valuable message that you carry. And so understanding that balance and being able to go the long haul and not just have a temporary clip that goes viral means that I can adjust to make sure that the job gets done. We're on a mission. This isn't about making our name great. And this is honestly not even about being yourself. This is about the mission, the word, the mandate that God has given us. And so whoever I need to become in order to get this mission done is what I'm willing to do.
Not too long ago, I spoke for TBN, and Matt Crouch asked me to talk about the racial unrest that existed in our country. And I had a conversation with him off camera that I think we even repeated on camera. I said, do you want the TBN version? The bless God, praise God, we're all one, and God is colorblind and he doesn't see color, and we're all just baptized believers. It's the Christian way of having a racial conversation. Or do you want the honest conversation, the raw, unabridged reality? Now that somebody has died right in our face, bled on the streets, lost their lives in front of all of us, and the whole world is upset. Can we have a real conversation, or do you want to have an abridged version of a desperately needed conversation? He said, I want the real thing. I want the real thing, to his credit. And we had an amazing conversation that they played over and over again. But I am also sensitive to the fact, the reason I asked him the question, that a TBN audience is not a CNN audience, is not even a Fox audience. And the language that they are used to hearing, this may be foreign. So there's a kind of disclaimer. The conversation that we're getting ready to have is going to be real. It's going to be candid. It's going to go places that you're not used to going. But at the end of the day, we're hoping to close the gap and connect as a people, and not just be connected idealistically, but realistically, by having a very frank discussion. And those discussions, when I do radio tours, is this a gospel station? Is this a business news station? Is this a talk station? Because understanding your audience allows you to make those little subtle adjustments. A tune-up is barely the flick of a hand, but a slight tune-up can make a lot of difference in how the engine runs. And I talk about tuning your message up, not tuning up like tuning up when you preach, but tuning it up to understand the audience, not just study the text, but study the audience and the environment so that you can use the right metaphors, so that you can be the most effective. Because what good is communication if it's not effective? What do you think, Dr. Ed?
I think that's spot on when it comes to rhetorical skills and ability to finesse a particular audience. And you talk back to this language of an art, to be able to engage and connect where people are, to take them in the message where you need them to go, where you want to deliver to them is so crucial. And I think that you talk about tune up, that mechanical language of tuning up the engine just a little bit to make it effective. I think that is so crucial, because in a generation when we talk about, I just want to be me, right? I just want to be me. Authenticity is the order of the day. But with authenticity, as you and also Sarah has said, you have to have the bandwidth to be able to finagle or to deliver, depending on what communication resource that you're granted. Because to preach or to speak in virtual space takes a slightly different kind of tune up than if you're physically up in front of people. And and I've seen you do that in amazing ways. But I think that for this generation, if we can glean all of that from you, what does a tune up mean when we are on CNN or on Fox, on MSNBC? What does that tune up actually look like? Do I deny my my sort of faith stance? Some people think, oh no, throw your faith stance. No, it's not throwing that out. You still have to be authentic, but you don't have to use church language to communicate it, right? Or you don't have to, you can use language of principles and character rather than spiritual language, right? Because we can think about character building and love and hope more than some of the sort of sanctified language we used back in sanctified church growing up, made people run around and scream and shout. Because now it's about being effective communicators in the public square. And I think that's where, if I can use spiritual reference now, that's where the Lord is taking us. He's taking us to the public square, where the church, somebody said, what church do you pastor? The world is my parish. That's
Right.
a language from one of the Wesley brothers, John Wesley, this idea that we have an opportunity, as we see through your book and also through your lived witness, on how to bear witness, not to witness, but to bear witness, to represent Christ in the public square. And I'll say this, during the pandemic, you were invited a few times on mainstream television and asked to pray. Before, I don't know anybody else who was asked to do that, but the door open, I believe, is because you had the bandwidth to connect with an audience in that space where they didn't feel threatened by your faith stance. In fact, it became a welcome part of you in a moment when it was most needed. And I think that those are the nuances that I see in the artistry section of this book, the rhetorical skills and the bandwidth that we have to have in order to be invited to certain spaces and places.
There's a book that I read years ago called The World is Flat, and it alluded to what the internet had done to the world. This is even prior to social media, that now you're talking to people that normally wouldn't hear you. So when you go out there now on the internet, on social media, on Instagram, you're not just talking to your tribe. You're talking to an extremely diverse group of people, that different things mean different things to different people. One guy asked me on Instagram recently, he saw me in a robe and a cassock and the whole bishop's regalia, and he said, you keep dibbling and dabbling with these Catholics, and rather than to be offended, because a lot of times when something is written, you can read it a certain way, and I read it first in a tone that made me tempted to be offended. But when I really thought about it, I thought, let's not assume that he is being offensive. And it turned out he really wasn't at all. I said to him, your point of reference for robes is Catholicism. But as an African-American, my pastor wore a robe every Sunday. So, and we were definitely not Catholic. And even today, for formal occasions in my community, we wear robes. And he wrote me back and he said, I didn't know that. And it's a simple thing, but it's a great moment to show how easily you can misunderstand each other and how easily I could have said something really offensive back then. But I chose rather to use his question as a teaching moment. And it turned out it didn't come from a hateful place. It came from a place of concern. And he did not have the worldview that I have. And the worldview that he had was totally different, not because he was white and I was black, but because he had come from Catholicism and wanted to get into a very different environment. And he thought that I was going where he left. And it had nothing to do with going where he left, whether that was good or bad. It had everything to do with my point of reference is totally different. I said, sometimes you will see me wear what looks like a robe and is a Nigerian outfit. And I told him the name of the outfit, and I told him that they wear them as suits. So I said, if I'm in an Agbada, it doesn't mean that I'm Catholic. It means that I'm acknowledging that my ancestors were Nigerian and they were Igbos, and I'm very comfortable in it. And I like them, and I wear them. And it's no different than you wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt, if that's your worldview. I went to Hillsong, and my guys, we were the only ones in the whole building, Peter, in a suit. I went the first night, and there's like a gazillion people in the room, and there's not a suit in the whole building, not the pastors, not the leaders, not the CEO. Everybody is running around in jeans and a shirt. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't pack for this, you know. Yeah. So, you know, the next night I took off my tie, and I had to adjust to an environment where you're in a different setting, because what does it matter what I have on if I'm not heard?
Mm-hmm.
And making the adjustments, the tweaks can be that small in order to go forward. We are seeing every day giants in the faith, giants in the government, giants in education passing off the scene. What a privilege, first of all, to have gotten to be here to see them and to meet them and to experience, but they're going off the scene. The ball is clearly in the hands of the living. God will do nothing with the deceased. And that responsibility led to the writing of this book, Don't Drop the Mic, because some of the greatest changes, the end of the apartheid, the end of Jim Crow, the establishment of this nation has been done not with just guns, but with microphones. Whoever wields a mic wields the power and potential of change if they have the courage to handle it. There's something else I wanted to touch on just a minute that Peter said quite a while ago that I want to go back to. He was talking about the platform, and that early on, I had to overcome fear. You never stop overcoming fear. Fear never goes away. It's just that you refuse to let it drive the car, but it's always a passenger. and learning how to, Joyce Myers wrote a book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. To feel the fear and do it anyway is a tremendous key to accomplishing what you were set out to do. And I know somebody's writing in the comments right now, God has not given us the spirit of fear. He didn't give us a spirit of fear, but he absolutely gave us fear, because you would not want to be in a jungle and have no fear. Fear is a tool and a friend in a dangerous situation. Like pain, it warns you that there's a problem. And so to have a certain amount of fear creates humility. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. to have a certain degree of dependency is a very important tool to have. As we close, and I won't take but about 5 or 10 more minutes of your time, I'm going to ask you, what are you afraid of? And that's a very deep question and a very personal question. Everybody's afraid of something at some point, sometime or other. What are you afraid of?
I'm going to go first so that no one steals my answer. I think that to the point of the book, it's dropping the mic. I think it's very clear that God has graced me to stand in a moment that feels so rare and effective and precious. And that if I am able to surrender and maintain well, I can continue to do this at this level for years and years to come. And yet I feel a responsibility to make sure that I don't drop the mic, that my fears, though they are there, stay in the passenger seat and don't start to drive, that my study habits and my hunger maintains its same emptiness, so that I'm always looking to improve. I don't want to get so comfortable that I start to just treat the mic casually instead of seeing it as the treasure and honor that it is. I am not foolish enough to believe that this time and opportunity is given to just anyone. And I just want to honor the grace and anointing that is on my life. So that requires me being out of the way. So to summarize that, dropping the mic, that's my fear.
Wow, wow. Peter?
And it's a powerful question. I loved Sarah's answer. I think for me, one of my fears is, the word says, to whom much is given, much is required. And I'm sobered by how much I've received from the Lord. Primarily, first and foremost, I've received Christ. I've received him. And to steward that mystery and to steward that call to make him known, I think deep down there's a fear of letting people see Christ in me. There's a fear of shining. There's a fear of really standing up in this generation and letting them see Christ and being bright and being fully who God made me to be. I grew up a shy, introverted little boy until the Spirit of God took hold of me, and I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing. And so to be in this position, like Sarah said, it's sobering, it's humbling. I want to be that vessel. And so I think for me, it's just not being small in my own eyes, like the prophet Samuel told Saul, and letting Christ really just come through me at however he wants that to be. And so that's something that when I look at you, I see someone who was unafraid to shine in adverse circumstances. And even this book and the tools here, I think, is really going to help me, I think, really address those fears.
Dr. A?
Wow. Yes, this is a question. I have two fears that haunt me all the time. One is a fear of failure, and one is a fear of rejection. When I was a little boy, I had learning challenges. The irony of the thing now is that I couldn't read when I was in the third grade. I couldn't read well. And everybody knows that if you don't read well, research shows that in the third grade, you're on the pipeline to prison. So I was in that pipeline. And so I had learning challenges. My elementary school wanted to put me in special education. And I had a speech impediment. And so from a little boy until now, my greatest fears are failure and rejection. And they're rooted in my own deeply rooted inabilities. And whenever I stand, and my threat with dropping the mic is this feeling of not being enough. So yeah, there you go. I can go on and on and on with that.
No, it's a very soul-searching question. I think in a previous interview, something was said that I thought long and hard about after the interview was over. One of the participants in the interview said the question isn't just don't drop the mic for young people. It's also don't drop the mic for more seasoned people, because you're still needed, even though the stage is turning. And don't drop the mic because we still need grandmama and big mama and pawpaw. We may not need you to do what you used to do, but we need you. If God kept you in the earth, he kept you for a reason. And it really, really, really resonated with me in a very, very deep and rich way. Because after 43 years of ministry, I am fighting for the young people to have all the tools they need to be successful. I'm fighting to give them what I wished I would have had, was mentorship. And I'm also fighting that 43 years of work isn't wasted, but that it continues in various forms, even if it's a new form. It doesn't have to be what I did, because maybe the world is changing and we won't do church the way we did church. But in whatever form it ends up evolving into, you want your fruit to remain. And so my fear is that my fruit will not remain, either through legacy or being aborted early or diverted in some way. I want to see my fruit remain. I started saying my fear is that you won't buy the book, but I would have been acting silly. But the real important thing is that all of that continues to flourish, and I see it. I see my fruit in the people that I teach, in the people that I birthed, in the situations I encountered, in the things that I was able to establish, both in the pulpit and out. I want that to continue. One other thing I wanted to get in that I think is an important thing to have said. Always remember, when you're looking at a text, all of the participants in the text are characters in the story. You have to decide which one is going to tell the story. Is it blind Bartimaeus that tells the story? Or is it a restless Jesus who is hurrying to Jerusalem for the last time to face the ultimate sacrifice, so perilous that he ends up in the Garden of Gethsemane sweating till great drops of sweat came out like blood? Or is it the disciples, the nervous disciples, who know that there is something different about this trip? And Thomas has said, I must go and die with him, and we don't have time to heal any blind people today. So shut up, because we got bigger problems than you to handle. Do they get to tell the story? Does blind Bartimaeus get to tell the story? Or does Jesus get to tell the story? Every time you read a text, you have to figure out who's going to do the talking. And it's much like a script. You can write a book and say, make a movie out of it. When the novel becomes a script, before you put your pen down on the paper, you have to decide through which character's eyes are we telling this story. The old movie Soul Food is told through the eyes of a little boy. So we see the whole family, the grandma and everybody, we see it through the eyes of a child. And he tells the story, not the sisters, not the siblings, not the grandmother. The little boy tells the story. And what you have to decide when you look at the text, who tells the story? Is it St. John? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shined in darkness, the darkness comprehended it not. Now there was a man who was sent from God. He was not that light, but he was sent to bear witness of that light. His name was John. Is it John the Baptist or John the disciple? Who do you want to tell the story? So if you choose the text, he was not that light, but he was sent to bear witness of that light. John, the disciple, is looking back at it. John the Baptist is in the middle of it, and whoever tells the story controls the dialogue from that point on. Is that helpful?
It's amazing.
For sure.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of stuff in the book. The book is called Don't Drop the Mic. Preachers will enjoy it. Lawyers will enjoy it. Husbands will enjoy it. Wives will enjoy it, because a lot of times marriages fall and fail over what is or is not said. And your spouse's ability to communicate emotionally determines, to a large degree, the health of the relationship and the fulfillment of creating not sex, but intimacy. Intimacy has very little to do with sexuality. It has a lot more to do with how fluent you are at expressing positive emotion, affirming emotion, affection through verbalization, and even frustration. How can you be frustrated and still be civil? All of that is in the book, and you'll find it interesting and fascinating. Again, the book is Don't Drop the Mic. Give it up for my panelists. I've enjoyed every one of you. You're absolutely brilliant. Applause and hats off to you. A little intimidating. When Dr. Antipas first came down, I said, when I first met him, he was teaching homiletics. Now he's on our pastoral staff, as well as running our school. It's uncomfortable to preach every week in front of somebody who teaches homiletics. You almost want to look over and say, is that right?
You made me say, I need to go back and study again to be able to do better than I used to. This is amazing.
well, it is. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Peter, for your openness to the Holy Spirit is amazing, and your openness to explore other cultures and to learn and to think and to participate and to connect says a whole lot about who you are as a person. I don't think you can be a great preacher if you're not a great person. People will soon weary of the antics of your preaching if your heart doesn't validate what your mouth is speaking. So thank you for having the heart and mouth to convey the nature of Christ to anybody and everybody so effectively. And
It's an honor.
To my baby girl, so proud of you. Just can't even articulate. So proud of you. The way you speak, the way you conduct yourself, the way you carry yourself, the way you manage yourself. I don't know how you do all the things you do. She speaks, she interviews, she preaches, she travels, and still cooks dinner and washes clothes and drives the kids to school. And for me, that's just like, I don't know how you do that. But you seem to be able to do that and still have your hair done and your eyes on and your makeup on and be ready. So you're an amazing person. We hope you got something out of this. We hope you enjoyed it. We were honest, we were open, we were real. I don't know what your mic is, what your platform is, what your influence is. It doesn't have to be on TV. It doesn't have to be in a pulpit, but all of us have influence. Don't drop it. Thank you.